Hello and welcome. My name's Amy Zadalka, and I'm speaking to you from my backyard in Victoria, British Columbia. On behalf of my co-presenter and myself, I'll be taking a few minutes to speak to you about this week's article, The Interpretive Turn and the New Debate in Education by Kenneth Howe. What is Howe saying? For one, he's saying that the positivist interpretivist debate, as well as the quantitative qualitative debate, are passé. When he was writing in 1998, interpretivist approaches as well as qualitative methodologies were already well accepted. According to Howe, a more relevant debate for researchers to consider is the one between the transformationists and the postmodernists. To explain interpretivism, Howe draws on Charles Taylor's book Interpretation and the Sciences of Man and explains that interpretivists believe that there is no such thing as a structure of meanings independent of human interpretation. In explaining postmodernism, Howe suggests that the postmodernists believe that the emancipatory project of modernity has exhausted itself, and in his words, that the task of social research and philosophy is to deconstruct, denormalize, dismantle, and so forth modernity's still quite powerful presence. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to examine the terms modernity and postmodernity. I'll do this by considering what they mean in the discipline of architecture, so it may seem as if I'm going off track for a moment. But bear with me. I promise I'll loop back and that this will be relevant to research methods. The discipline of architecture was one of the places that discussions of modernity versus postmodernity first arose, so it can be helpful to go back there in order to ground ourselves in the terms. One of the archetypal modernist architects was Mies van der Rohe, who was known for the aphorism "less is more" and for clean and ornamented buildings like the Seagram Building in Chicago. Architects like van der Rohe strongly believed that they had an almost ethical duty to be true to the nature of materials, that the true nature of a material ought to dictate what a building looked like. So the Seagram Building reflects the fact that it is built with steel beams. For an architect like van der Rohe, it would have been blasphemous to cover the steel with any kind of cladding. The key point here, in terms of modernism, is that there is a foundational truth upon which van der Rohe could hang his hat and from which his approach could emerge. And that foundational truth lies in the nature of the building materials. Let's look in contrast to postmodernist architects. For example, in his book Learning from Las Vegas, Robert Venturi suggested that rather than writing off Las Vegas as kitschy and grotesque, as the modernists would have done, why not learn from it? Why isn't, for example, a giant duck as valid an architectural expression as one of van der Rohe's steel towers? According to Venturi, less is a bore. Similarly, Philip Johnson, in designing what is now the Sony building, put a neoclassical decoration, a little ornamentation at its top. Because why not? According to Johnson, the riches of history can be plucked at any point. He didn't need a reason to use whatever ornament from history he found aesthetically pleasing. In other words, there is no truth or hard and fast rules the postmodernist architects felt they needed to adhere to. And in fact, by designing the buildings they did, they were trying to point out that all truths were in fact arbitrary. So, in the words of this week's author, Howe, they were thus, quote, deconstructing, denormalizing, and dismantling what for the modernists was gospel. Of course, this distinction between modernism and postmodernism isn't only about architecture. Take, for example, feminism. A feminist like Betty Friedan, who in 1963 wrote The Feminine Mystique, had a clear agenda to liberate housewives from what she depicted as a mind-numbing, soul-sucking existence. Here's a quote. Women who adjust as housewives, who grow up wanting to be just a housewife, are suffering a slow death of mind and spirit. What you can see here is that Friedan is relying on a truth, that she believes there is a universal experience of women and of housewives which she can speak to. Her project is emancipatory in that she is writing in the hopes that she can contribute to overturning this unacceptable situation. Now, for contrast, let's consider Madonna. Many critics have called her postmodern. Why? There are many reasons, but to name a few, you don't know what the underlying truth of Madonna is. She's all image, and her image has continually changed, thus causing us to question if there is any authentic self beneath the artifice. She takes symbols of femininity, for example, her famous cone-shaped bra, but plays with them, so you don't know if they mean the same thing as they did before she wore them. For example, feminists like Betty Friedan or Gloria Steinem would surely have considered wearing a cone-shaped bra to be exploitative and anti-feminist. But when Madonna wears it, you don't know if she is actually, in fact, a symbol of female empowerment. Returning once again to Howe's language, it could be argued that Madonna has deconstructed, denormalized, and dismantled what feminists might have previously believed to be a truth about what female empowerment looked like. Those are a few examples that help me make sense of the article. I hope they're helpful to you. But moving back to the topic at hand, to summarize, the modernists believe in a grand narrative and a truth, which they can stand on to work toward a better world. Postmodernists have less certainty and are focused more on deconstructing what they would perceive as false narratives that we cling to. Heading back into the article, let's look at how Howe defines transformationism. In his words, transformationists believe that although significantly flawed, much of the emancipatory project of modernity can be and ought to be preserved. The task of social research and philosophy is to see this project through. Transformationists are united against postmodernists, who they see as radically relativistic, hyperskeptical, and nihilistic. So going back to my feminism example, we could consider Bell Hooks a transformationist. In her 1981 book, Ain't I a Woman?, Hooks, among other things, critiques feminists like Betty Friedan, claiming that their feminist movement is for the most part a white middle and upper class movement. She says that her voice is not represented by feminists like Friedan. But interestingly, rather than dismissing the movement, Hooks works to make it more inclusive. She doesn't dismiss the importance of an earnest, emancipatory feminism where women will be more empowered. Rather, she seeks to address its blind spots. Returning to the quote by Howe, although Hooks would see the modernist feminist project as flawed, she seeks to preserve it and see it through rather than dismantle it.